Hello, hello. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. My name is Darren Lee, and I am the program manager here at City of Asylum. As you saw in the video, City of Asylum started about 20 years ago as a sanctuary program for writers persecuted for their work and forced into exile. Currently, we have 7 writers in residence, and each of these writers is supported with for at least 3 years with a home in Pittsburgh, a stipend, legal counsel, medical support, and professional development support. And this actually makes us the largest program of our kind in the world. It's very special that we're here in Pittsburgh. Yeah. And then a very serendipitous thing happened in that, one of our early writers, he was a poet and he would stand outside of his stoop on the north side and share his poetry, and then the people gathered. We had another early writer who wrote a full book during his time here. And of course, you have to have a book launch party. So we started to do these events once in a while. And currently, we host over 120 arts programs every single year. And that includes things like readings, like we'll experience in a minute, concerts, film screenings, and ASL poetry slam. So we really run the gamut. And I see a lot of familiar faces, but if it's your first time here, I hope to see you again for some of our other programming, which you can see online. This building was a former Masonic hall, and it was restored and it opened as a home for our programming about a handful of years ago. And as you can see, a lot of things are happening here. There is a bar, and the restaurant will be open for dinner when dinner hour comes, but you can grab a drink if you wanted to. On your right, you can see some shelves. And then after the program, the chairs will be moved and all the shelves will be rolled out so you can purchase a book. Copies of Terrance Hayes' books are available for sale and you can get them signed. And it's very special because proceeds from the bookstore support the Writer Sanctuary program. So all of your support means a lot to us. And why are we here tonight? We are here for the relaunch of the International Poetry Forum. And to share a little bit more about the forum, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce the president and executive director of the International Poetry Forum, Jake Grefenstette. After spending time in Indiana, in England, in China, he returned to his hometown of Pittsburgh, and he's now the leader of the International Poetry Forum. In addition to his work there, he is a special faculty member in philosophy at Carnegie Mellon University, where he is also the poetry editor for that press. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Jake Grefenstette.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the International Poetry Forum. This is just such an honor to be here today. Is there anyone who's here at the International Poetry Forum for the first time? Wonderful. And anyone who's attended a performance before? Oh, great, about half and half. So I just want to give a little bit about our history. We were founded in Pittsburgh in 1966 by Samuel Heaney, who served as the first state poet of Pennsylvania. Sam launched something truly incredible in Pittsburgh, and against all odds, ran one of the most significant reading series in the country for 43 years. 43 years and dog years is a lot, and arts administrator years is about 1 million. So he brought in around 800 poets, performers, and musicians, folks like Seamus Heaney, Gwendolyn Brooks, Grace Kelly, James Earl Jones. You can find the whole list and a number of archival recordings on our website. But when Sam retired in 2009, it seemed like the forum would be shut down for good. This is heartbreaking. I was in high school at the time. My teachers loved the forum, and it was such a part of the high school educational experience, a lot of the outreach programs that they did. So I was really floored. I moved back to Pittsburgh with my wife and daughter about 2 years ago. And when Sam brought this up, we just dropped everything. And it's been thanks to the support of people like you, foundations and individuals in Pittsburgh who have made this possible. So we want to say thank you to everyone here, to all of our supporters. Thank you especially to Dr. Hayes for trusting us with taking the reins and relaunching this organization after 15 years. Thank you to City of Asylum, this wonderful organization, for hosting this. We thought really hard about where we wanted to host our relaunch event. And Sam had the wonderful idea of picking a place that's intimate and has some history with the forum. So this is just such a wonderful place to be. Now, when one of my friends heard that I was going to be involved in relaunching the forum, she accused me of being on board solely to have an excuse to host Terrance Hayes for poetry reading in Pittsburgh. And I think that's a plausible accusation. Those of you who know me know I think syllable for syllable, he's one of the best writers that we have. When Kurt Vonnegut performed at the International Poetry Forum in 1971, he said, statistically, America is owed about 300 Shakespeares. I firmly believe that Terrance is part of this number. I mean, that can sound pretty grandiose, but to put it in more human terms, he's one of those people that the universe sends us from time to time to think seriously, even to rethink our humanity. We're so happy to have him here. The poet Jeffrey Hill says, "Great poetry is not a spillage, but an ingathering." Those words are still mysterious to me, but I know they describe Terrance's work. Terrance has had a great career tied with Pittsburgh. He completed his MFA from the University of Pittsburgh in 1997 and had wonderful careers teaching in town at both Carnegie Mellon University and the University of Pittsburgh. He is now a professor at NYU, and he has received a long list of awards, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, MacArthur Genius Grant. He is the author of 7 books of poetry and 2 additional books, including his latest, So to Speak and Watch Your Language. Other books include American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin, finalist for the National Book Award, and Lighthead Poems, which received the National Book Award in 2010. He is truly one of the great living poets we have today, and we're just honored to be able to have him back here to help us relaunch the International Poetry Forum. So please join me in welcoming back to the stage Terrance Hayes.
Hey y'all, look man, I'm home, so I'm gonna treat it like I know all of y'all. I should know a bunch of you, and we're gonna do a Q&A, right? So I feel like I don't have to say too much because you're gonna ask me questions. I am happy to be here, and I guess I will say this though about the great idea that it's the City of Asylum and the International Poetry Forum. I mean, certainly I think my adult life here with the family is connected to the City of Asylum. I think I got back to Pittsburgh in now maybe it was 2003 or 2002, and so I can remember this place coming into being in the same time as, like, whether it's my career, whether it's my kids, and the International Poetry Forum. It would be that other life as a grad student here, relying on that to show me what poetry was and what it meant to sponsor poetry, what it meant to care about poetry in a kind of lived way. So I was sad when away. I think I was one of the last people to read in it. That's one of my claims to fame. That's how much I think about it. One of the last people to read it, and one of the last, people to see it. Sorry to go. So I'm very happy that we're back here together and that we're gonna launch this thing again. I'll come to town to see some readings. Can I say too, though, I mean, one of the things I think about the City of Asylum and an International Poetry Forum, both of these things that kind of have in their name something that seems outside of Pittsburgh, and 2 things that are like so essential to like the Pittsburgh community, so that they are very much regional, local, hometown, homegrown events, even if they're bringing the world to our doorstep. So, I mean, I think that's a very special thing. Okay, so look, I'm just going to read. It came up again today, like stuff about how to be drawn. So I thought I would read a few poems from this, and I can set you up for some conversations. Because I feel like, would you say 7 books? I think I got like 7 or something like that. So around now, people are like, are you going to do a new and selected? And I've always said no. You do that when I'm dead. But just the conversation has had me like pulling out some old poems. So I did a thing. Joy was there. And I mostly try to read new things. And in fact, I'm going to get to where I can try this one poem out that I can't work the ending out. And then I'll be done. But I typically am not really reading that much from the older books. But I did mark a few things because I think I left. This book came out in 2015 and then I was kind of gone. So I feel like it's my first time kind of reading it here. So I'm going to read for a little while and then we'll talk. Let's see. Here's one. And some of these, like I haven't even looked at for a few years, so I think that'll make me read slowly. So I'm reading from How to Be Drawn, the book before the sonnets, and this one's called How to Be Drawn to Trouble. The people I live with are troubled by the way I have been playing Please, Please, Please by James Brown and the Famous Flames all evening, but they won't say. I've got a lot of my mother's music in me. James Brown is no longer a headwind of hot grease and squealing for ladies with leopard-skinned intentions, stoned on horns and money. Once, I only knew his feel-good music. While my mother watched convicts dream, I was in my bedroom pretending to be his echo. I still love the way he says please 10 times straight, bending one syllable until it sounds like 3. Trouble is one of the ways we discover the complexities of the soul. Once my mother bit the wrist of a traffic cop, but was not locked away because, like him, she was an officer of the state. She was a guard at the prison in which James Brown was briefly imprisoned. There had been broken man-made laws, a car chase melee, a roadblock of troopers in sunblock. I, for one, don't trust the police because they go around looking to eradicate trouble. T-R-O, you better believe in trouble. Trouble is how we learn what the soul is. James Brown, that brother, could spice up any sentence he uttered or was given. His accent made it sound like he was pleading whether he was speaking or singing. A woman can make a man sing. After another of my mother's disappearances, my father left her bags on the porch. My father believes a man should never dance in public. Under no circumstances should a grown man have hair long enough to braid. If I was a black girl, I'd always be mad. I might weep and break too, but think about the good things. My mother and I love James Brown in a cape and sweat like glitter that glows like little bits of gold. In the photograph she took with him, he holds her wrist oddly, probably unintentionally covering her scar. There's the trouble of being misunderstood and the trouble of being soul brother number one, soul brother, Godfather Dynamite. Add to that the trouble of shouting, I got to get out, I got to get down, I got to get on up the road. For many years, there was a dancing competition between my mother and father, though rarely did they actually dance. They did not scuffle like drums or cymbals, but like something sluggish and close to earth. You know how things work when they don't work? I want to think about the good things. The day after the Godfather of Soul finished signing just that, all over everything in the prison, all my mother wanted to talk about were his shoes. For some reason, he had 6 or 7 pairs of Italian leather beneath his bunk, suggesting where he'd been, even if for the moment he wasn't going anywhere. Think about how little your feet would touch the ground if you were on your knees pleading 2 or 3 times a day. There are theories about freedom, and there is a song that says none of us are free. My mother had gone out Saturday night and came home Sunday an hour before church. She punched clean through the porch window when we wouldn't let her in. I can still hear all the love buried under all the noise she made. But sometimes I hear it wrong. It's not James Brown making trouble. It's trouble he's drawn to. Baby, you done me wrong, took my love, and now you're gone. It's trouble he's asking to stay. My father might have said please when my mother was beating the door and then calling to me from the window. I might have heard her say please just before or just after the glass and then the skin along her wrist broke. Please, 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 please. That's how James Brown says it. Please, 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 please. Honey, please don't go. I was talking about like with the young writers, those day poems and saying like, mostly all I'm trying to do is just like get something down. Would I count this as an inspired poem? I don't think so necessarily, but it is kind of like one of those poems where it was just like a weird day. So it's just called New York poem. I wrote it before I ever got to New York. In New York, from a rooftop in Chinatown, one can see all the sci-fi bridges and aisles of buildings where there are more miles of shortcuts and alternative takes than there are Miles Davis alternative takes. There is a white girl who looks hijacked with feeling in her glittering jacket and her boots that look made of dinosaur skin. And R is saying to her, I love you, again and again. On a Chinatown rooftop in New York, anything can happen. Someone says abattoir is such a pretty word for slaughterhouse. Someone says mermaids are just fish ladies. I am so fucking vain, I cannot believe anyone is threatened by me. In New York, not everyone is forgiven. Dear New York, dear girl with a barcode tattooed on the side of your face, and everyone writing poems about and inside and outside the subways, dear people underground in New York, on the sci-fi bridges and aisles of New York, on the rooftops of Chinatown, where Miles Davis is pumping in and someone is telling me about contronyms, how cleave and cleave are the same word looking in opposite directions. I now know bolt is to lock and bolt is to run away. That's how I think of New York. Someone jonesing for Grace Jones at the party and someone jonesing for Grace. Just a couple more. For some reason, I'm like, on Sunday, I feel like this would be the closest I would get to something like a kind of religious poem, I guess. But again, in terms of lessons, things that we didn't get all the way to talk to with the group I talked to this morning, a sentence, a poem that's just one long sentence, whether it's a sonnet or maybe even a haiku that could be one long sentence. But that would be, again, what I would think of as part of my just regular practice. It ain't subject, it's just like the same thing as form, where we're like, are you a formalist? I'm like, a sentence can be construed as a kind of form too. I love sentences. So this is one long sentence. The carpenter ant. It was when or because she became two kinds of mad, both a feral nail biting into a plank and a deranged screw cranking into a wood beam, the aunt, I shouldn't say her name. See, so people call it ant. When I first wrote this poem, that's what I mean about old poems, I was meditating on I say aunt. I know some people say ant, and it's called carpenter ant for the people who say ant so that you would hear it as that, but I'm gonna say aunt, but I mean ant. The aunt, I shouldn't say her name, went at the fullest hour of the night, the moon there like an unflowered bulb in a darkness like mud, or covered in darkness as a bulb or skull is covered in mud. The small brown aunt who, before she went mad, taught herself to carpenter, and unhinged in her madness, the walls she claimed were bugged with tiny red-eye devices planted by the state or Satan's agents or ghosts of atheists, her foes, or worse, the walls were full of bugs she believed crawled from her former son-in-law's crooked mouth. The aunt who knows, as all creatures know, you have to be rooted in something tangible as wood if you wish to dream in peace, took her hammer with its claw like a mandible to her own handmade housing, humming, I don't know why God keeps blessing me, softly, madly, and I understood. I was with her when the pallbearers carried a box made of mahogany from her church to a hearse to a hole in the earth. It made me think of the carpenter ant, who carries within its blood an evolved self-destructive property, and on its face mandibles twice the size of its body, and can carry on its back, as I have seen on TV, a rotted bird or branch great distances to wherever the queen is buried. Kingdom Animalia, phylum Arthropoda, tribe Camponotini, the species that lives on wood, is, like mud, rain, and time, the carpenter's enemy. Yes, but I would love to devour the house I live in until it is a permanent part of me. I would love to shape as Perunktachan, the master sculptor, carpenter, and architect of India, is said to have shaped a beautiful tree into the coffin in which I am to be buried. I know whatever we place in a coffin, the coffin remains empty. I know nothing buried is buried. I don't know why God keeps blessing me. I don't know why God keeps blessing me. That's just a line from a Kanye West, Kendrick Lamar, not Kanye West, Kendrick Lamar song. One of his oldest songs was this refrain in it that I wanted to, again, talking to the students about like where influence is. Like, I just thought that was such a wild line for a rap song. Like, I don't know why God keeps blessing me. So I was like, can I put that in a poem? How about one more from this book? And then we'll look at a few new ones. I mean, a few things from the most recent book and one new thing that I really want to try, and then we can talk. The Rose Has Teeth. I'm sure I've read this around town. We got a piano on the stage. I was trying to play the 12-bar blues with 2 bars. I was trying to fill the room with a shocked and awkward color. I was trying to limber your shuffle, the muscle wired to muscle. I wanted to be a lucid hammer. I was trying to play like the first mechanic asked to repair the first automobile. Once, piano, every man-made song could fit in your mouth. But I was trying to play Burial's Ghost Hardware. I was trying to play Matmos's Roses and Teeth for Ludwig Wittgenstein. I was trying to play the sound of applause by trying to play the sound of rain. I was trying to mimic the stain on a bed, the sound of a woman's soft, contracting bellow, the answer to who I am. Before I trust the God who makes me rot, I trust you, piano. Something deathless fills your wood. Because I wanted to be invisible, I was trying to play like a woman blacker than an unpaid light bill, like a white boy lost in the snow. I wanted to be a ghost because the skull is just a few holes covered in meat. The skin has no teeth. I was trying to play what I felt singing in the mirror as a boy. I was trying to play what I overheard, the old questions, the hunger, the rattle of spines. The body that only loves what it can touch always turns to dust. What would a mother feel if her child sang, "Sometimes I feel like a motherless child too beautifully"? A hole has no teeth. A bird has no teeth. But you got teeth, piano. You make me high. You make me dance as only a sail can dance its ragged, assailable dance. You make me believe there is good in me. My lady, she dreams I am better than I am. I was trying to play Muhammadu Bamba like a band of Africans named after a tree. A tree has no teeth. A horn has no teeth. Don't chew, piano. Don't chew. Sing to me, you fine-ass lounging harp. You fancy engine doing other people's work. I was trying to play the sound of an empty house because that's how I get by when the darkness in my body starts to bleed. I was trying to play Autumn Leaves because that's what my lady's falling dress sounds like to me. Before you, piano, I was just a rap of knuckles on a windowsill. I am filled with the sound of my lover's breathing, and only you can bring it out of me. I mean, there's so many. I can't only read from this book, obviously, but I'm like, I hadn't read this thing in a long time, too. This is a really weird poem. Antebellum House Party. To make the servant in the corner unobjectionable furniture, we first must make her a bundle of tree parts, act and worked to confidence. Oak-jawed, birch-backed, cedar-skinned, a pillowy bosom for the boss infants, a fine patterned cushion the boss can fall upon. Furniture does not pine for a future wherein the boss plantation house will be ransacked by Calvaries or Calvary. A kitchen table can, in throes of a yellow fever outbreak, become a cooling board holding the boss wife's body. It can, on ordinary days, also be an ironing board holding the boss garments in need of ironing. Tonight, it is simply a place for a white cup of coffee, a tin of white cream. Boss calls for sugar, and the furniture bears it sweetly. Let us fill the mouth of the boss with something stored in the pantry of a house war, decency, nor bedeviled storms can wipe from the past. Furniture's presence should be little more than a warm feeling in the den. The dog staring into the fireplace imagines each log as a bone that would taste like a spiritual wafer on its tongue. Let us imagine the servant ordered down on all fours in the manner of an ottoman, whereupon the boss volume of John James Audubon's Birds of America can be placed. Antebellum residents who possessed the most encyclopedic bookcases, luxurious armoires, and beds with ornate cotton canopies often threw the most photogenic dinner parties. Long after they have burned to ash, the hound dog sits there, mourning the succulent bones he believes the logs used to be. Imagination is the boss of memory. Let us imagine music radiating through the fields as if music were reward for suffering. A few of the birds Audubon drew are now extinct. The Carolina parakeet, passenger pigeon, and Labrador duck no longer nuisance the boss property. With so much furniture about, there are far fewer woods. Is furniture's fate as tragic as the fate of an axe, the part of a tree that helps bring down the most upstanding trees? The best furniture can stand so quietly in a room that the room appears empty. If it remains unbroken, it lives long enough to become antique. So again, with these kinds of poems, I'm going to stop with that book. I think that poem is on a photograph where a black woman is just like around antebellum time in the back holding a tray, and while these people are in the front doing something. I should have said that, right? I should have said it's like, okay, so look, I'll read a few of these things and then we can talk. Look here. Homage to Gertrude Badu, because, some of y'all know Gertrude Stein was born in the neighborhood. Do y'all know that? Right up the street. They need to do something. They got a little sign, but I think it would be more. So in my way of writing, especially like if I say the way that Pittsburgh is still very much in my bank of imagery, where poets get things when they close their eyes, things all will show up. So it's just a little moment in here where I'm just like spray painting the war streets, and I'm really totally thinking about over here. But I also like Erykah Badu, so I made it both of them. I like Gertrude Stein and Erykah Badu, so it'll be one person in the poem. Okay. If your mama was fine as half a bottle of honey wine, or your daddy cool as a coin tossed in a wishing well, well, yeah, she might compliment your style. But more often than not, her eyeglasses were tuned to whatever she was illegally spraying on the war streets. If Clay and Lula from Baraka's 1964 play Dutchman had a baby, if Lula and the white folks hadn't killed Brother Clay, what do you suppose would have been the first and middle name of their baby? This is what she asked me before signing my yearbook, so no telling what she felt for me. Her shoes, I think they called them moon or maybe minor boots. Once when she stooped to blow smoke into the mouth of a neighbor's pit bull, I saw the glitter on her G-string. Her and the pigtailed cashier from the corner store stole the preacher's 2-pound Bible. She spoke nothing but verbs and sighs to priests. Her and a girl with a head of freckles broke into the Mickey D, the Joanne Fabric, the back rub parlor, and left the goods on the lawn of our retired high school principal. You know what you call someone who wins by cheating? She asked me later that day. A winner. No one lives in adult movies, she used to say. If I recited all the laws of the Gnostics, she promised to kiss me in some mysterious way or some even more mysterious part of my longing. She used to say trombone was always the word of the day. Also, anytime one finds oneself facing oneself in a mirror, one must say to the mirror, you don't know shit about me. She used to say, you can't be free trapped in a body. That's my Mexican War Streets poem. Let's see here. Continuity. You can find some of these poems online. I think it just explains itself. I don't think I need to say anything about it. Continuity. Well, it's like a movie scene. It's like we're looking at a movie or something. I can't remember. Before getting into the cab, she hands him a cup. Then, after they kiss, she hands him the cup again. As they walk, she hands him a man-made substance. Then, after they kiss, she hands him a cup again. She hands him a chalice of lightning, and he hands her a chalice of fire. Then, in the next shot, after they kiss, they exchange chalices again. When she goes through the metal detector, she carefully places a pair of hoop earrings in a plastic tray. When she retrieves them, there are 2 silver bangles she fits to her wrists. When they climb from the cab in the rain, her hair is wet, but when they kiss on the sidewalk, her hair is dry again. After she takes off her helmet and breastplate and enters the water wearing nothing but courage, she says to him, "You are nude, but you must be naked to win." But the subtitles read, "To survive, you must bear the heart." When they climb from the river, her hair is a river where night has fallen, tangled with twigs and stars, parting like a path of escape. But in the very next shot, as they climb from the river, her hair is braided with wire and string. When he bangs on the rain-streaked window of the cab, yelling her name in a pivotal scene, briefly reflected in the window in the rain, tangled with wires and stars above a river, is the hand of a fan or a stagehand or a bodyguard, body double, bystander, interloper, beloved ghost, than the 2 of us watching from a bridge on the far side. Again, I'm doing backward setups here. I should be setting you up first. To me, that's like a New York poem where, you never know when you're going to be in somebody's movie. That's what it feels like to be in New York, walking around like, I'm looking at this. Is that me in the background? Are we? Watch part while they were filming it. It's something like that. Let's see, a few more, and then we can talk. Pseudocris Crucifer. This is actually the first poem, or one of the first poems in the book. For Aaron. The father begins to make the sound a tree frog makes when he comes with his son and daughter to a pail of tree frogs for sale in a deep south flea market just before the last blood of dusk. A tree frog is called a tree frog because it chirps like a bird in a tree, he tells his daughter, while her little brother, barely 4 years old, busies himself like a small blues piper with a brand new birthday harmonica. A single tree frog can sound like a sleigh bell, the father says. Several can sound like a choir of crickets. Once in high school, as I dissected a frog, the frog opened its eyes to judge its deconstruction, its disassembly, my scooping and poking at its soul. And the little girl's eyes go wide as a tree frog's eyes. Some call it the spring peeper. In Latin, it's called Pseudocris Crucifer. False locusts, toads with falsettos, their chimes issuing below the low leaves and petals. The harmonica playing is so otherworldly, the boy blows with his eyes closed. Some tree frog species spend most every day underground. They don't know what sunlight does at dusk. They are nocturnal insectivores. No bigger than a green thumb, they are the first frogs to call in spring. They may sound like crickets only because they eat so many crickets. Tree frogs mostly sound like birds. The tree frog overcomes its fear of birds by singing. The harmonica playing is so bewitching, the boy gathers a crowd in a flea market in the deep south. A bird may eat a tree frog, a fox may eat the bird, a wolf may eat the fox, and the wolf then may carry varieties of music and cunning in its belly as it roams the countryside. A wolf hungers because it cannot feel the good in its body. The people clap and gather round with fangs and smiles. The father lifts the son to his shoulders so the boy's harmonics hover over varieties of affection, varieties of bodies with their backs to a firmament burning and opening. You can find damn near anything in a flea market. Pets, weapons, flags, farm fresh as well as farm spoiled fruits and vegetables, varieties of old wardrobes, a rusty old tin box with old postcards and old photos of lynchings dusted in the rust of the box. You can feel it on the tips of your fingers, this rust, which is almost as brown as the father and the boy on his shoulders and the girl making the sound a tree frog makes in a flea market in the deep south before the last blood of dusk, just before the last blood of dusk, just before the dusk. All right, now I'm just trying to set you up for the thing I want to try out here. This poem, which is actually an older poem, but it just sort of wound up in this book, is Ars Poetica with Bacon. And the poem I'm working out is like anti-Ars Poetica. So I'm going to read this one and read you one more, and maybe we can talk. If I haven't read enough, you can ask me during the Q&A or something. But I'll just do these last two, and then we can talk. Okay, Ars Poetica with Bacon. Fortunately, the family, anxious about its diminishing food supply, encountered a small, possibly hostile pig along the way. The daughter happened upon it first, pushing its scuffed snout against something hidden at the base of a thorn bush. A blood-covered egg, maybe, or a small rubber ball exactly like the sort that snapped from the paddle my mother used to beat me with when I let her down. At the time, the father and mother were tangled in some immemorial dispute about cause and effect, who'd harmed whom first, how jealousy did not, in fact, begin as jealousy, but as desperation. When the daughter called out to them, they turned to see her lift the pig, it was no heavier than an orphan, from the bushes and then set it down in their path. They waited to see whether the pig might idle forward with them until they made camp or wander back toward the home they'd abandoned to war. Night, enclosed in small drops of rain, began to fall upon them. Consequence is the word that splintered my mind. Walking a path in the dark is about something the way a family is about something. Like the pig, I too wanted to reach through the thorns for the egg or ball, believing it was a symbol of things to come. I wanted to roll it in my palm like the head of a small red bird until it sang to me. I wanted to know how my mother passed her days, having never touched her husband's asshole, for example. Which parts of your body have never been touched? I wanted to ask. I'd been hired to lead the family from danger to a territory full of more seeds than bullets, but truth was, in the darkness, there was no telling what was rooting in the soil. Plots of complete silence, romantics posing in a field bludgeoned by shame. The heart, biologically speaking, is ugly as it pumps its passion and fear down the veins. Which is to say, starting out, we have no wounds to speak of beyond the ways our parents expressed their love. We were never sure what the pig was after, or whether it was in fact not a pig, but some single-minded soul hunger had turned into a pig, some devil worthy of mercy. Without giving away the enigmatic ending, I will say, when we swallowed the flesh, our eyes were closed. Okay. Okay, this is the last one. I had it memorized, this poem, but because I can't figure the ending out, I feel like I can't really say that it's memorized. So I'll see what I got here, and then we'll talk. So Anti-Ars Poetica. Once upon a long past time, two orphan twins ventured from their village into the world, promising to return someday with tales and treasures for all. They soon learned every story, even the most minor adventure, would come with the cost. They battled various forces of noise and destruction, alchemies and technologies of misdirection, wicked weather, monstrous gravity. As they got more and more bruised and banged up, they felt more and more differently about the wounds they accrued. The scars hardened into a tougher, leathery skin for one twin, but seemed softer and more symbolic for the other. One day, while the tougher twin was off hunting and gathering, the less tough twin fell into a dream so deep, creeping shadows drugged and dragged him off. He was hidden deep in the forest by the forest, or swallowed by a mountain cave or a biblical well. The tougher twin searched and searched, fighting terrible monsters alone. Tales of his courage reached the villagers back home. He became known as the hero. Stories of his quest spread far, but he was not looking for gold, nor a maiden, nor fame, as was sometimes retold. Many long adventure-weary years later, the hero found his twin, still dreaming. Carrying his sword and sleeping brother, the hero climbed out of a dark forest or down the side of a treacherous mountain or climbed from the mouth of a whale, battling various forces of noise and destruction. Nothing broke the dreaming sickness, his brother grew thin as a shadow, eating nothing but dreams. Then some witch or wizard disguised as an owl told the hero his brother would regain some hearing if he fed him an ear. The owl said his brother would regain some vision if he gave him an eye. The hero didn't hesitate. He cut off one of his ears, and though the dreaming brother had previously refused all other food, he quickly ate the ear. Suddenly, a third ear appeared at the top of the dreaming brother's head so that he could listen to the sky. The hero removed one of his eyeballs, and the brother almost leapt to eat it, and then a third eye appeared between his two suddenly open eyes, and now he could see between night and day, true and false, life and death. Awake, he thought he was still dreaming when he saw his brother's new disfigured face, one focused eye, one open ear. The scarred twin remained the hero, but now the stranger-looking twin sang and told tales about the other's heroics along the way. They made it back to their village, but when the people saw them, they doubted they were ever really twins and secretly doubted they were still human. But one had a body of knowledge and one had a body of wisdom to share. The villagers let the twins live on opposite sides of the village. One became the hero, the other the storyteller. Separate schools, myths, and philosophies formed around them, and sometimes that's where the story ends. But much later, despite having been separated for years, the twins died at the same time. The twin with one eye was buried in a moving ceremony in the village, but the other twin was hidden deep in the forest or in a mountain cave or buried at the bottom of a well or in the belly of a religion. The twin with the extra eye and ear, the one who consumed the lives of others to live, the storyteller whose stories consumed us, was buried somewhere far, far away. See, I don't know. There's two sentences here that I'm like, I think I want to end there. So anyway, I'm working that out. We can talk about it in Q&A. I still don't know. Glad to be here, y'all. I'm looking forward to just talking whatever you want to talk about. Thank you for coming out on a Sunday. I love y'all. Needless to. Was that long enough?
That was perfect. Thank you so much again, Terrance, for coming out. So for simplicity's sake, we've pre-requested some questions. Also, some high school students I've spoken with, some college students, I've got their questions as well. So I'll have a few questions from me and some others to float out here. Okay. But I want to start with that last poem.
Mm-hmm. Sure. That's what I'm thinking about. So
1966, October, almost exactly 58 years ago, Archibald MacLeish gave the opening performance for the International Poetry Forum. He read his Ars Poetica, which many of you may have encountered from high school.
A poem must mean, not be.
Mm-hmm.
Must be, not mean. A poem must be, not mean. Yeah.
Mm. So for those unfamiliar, what is the tradition of the Ars Poetica poem, and what are you thinking by an anti-Ars Poetica poem?
Well, even that I would take so long maybe to put that first one I read in the most recent book, and I think that poem, it's certainly the oldest poem in the book, and saying inside of that poem a few things. So sometimes when I set up the Ars Poetic with Bacon poem, I'll say things to people like, when I say a family, walking in the dark is like sort of existing in a family, I think of poems that way. Like, what really is a poem about? What is a family about? It's sort of beyond definition, what family is. We have a kind of general sense, but when you're in your family, it's just like in a dark, familiar space. That one, setting out, we have no love to speak of beyond the ways our parents have expressed their loves. Even in the set today, if you hear how much my mother is sort of showing up in that set, that would have to be a Ars Poetical statement for me in order to move towards something like forgiveness or reconciliation for whatever my childhood was, which is to say, it's still an attempt, whatever our parents are doing to protect us or to teach us, even if it's abrasive, violent, wrong-headed, it still is coming from some sort of expression of care, I think, So that line is a line I turn around a lot in my work. I feel like there probably was one more in that particular poem. The anti-ars poetica, though, actually is going to bring us to something very recent. I think it's why I pulled it back out. Like, my brother lives in Tampa, so he just suffered through, that storm. My parents live in South Carolina, so they suffered through the storm before that. But I was just really thinking about, it's the ars poetical point too. So this is where I really am. So I'm much more like, loose when I'm talking about stuff I'm working on. But I'm just trying to articulate what they give me and like almost what the problem with that is. So the reason I can't work out the ending of the poem is because I want to both suggest, it's like the one who ate the flesh, like even though he was given the eye of his brother. So in that poem, the hero is my brother. He's in the army, he's a great dad, he's very responsible. He maybe got a couple of my books, that's fine. So a very like in the world, lived physical being. I think of my dad that way. I think we could think of people in our lives who are people of action. How about that? People of action. And I'm something else. And so in that piece, I'm sort of articulating what it means to like live off the sights and sounds of others. And like the thing that I can't work out is like, do I want to say zombie, or do I want to focus on the idea of the community's fear that they would not bury the person with the 3 eyes and the 3 ears in the village? They would bury him outside, but they would bury the person who's made the sacrifices, the person who gave up the eye in the village, and that person would be revered. And that's the ars poetical gesture, which is to say, y'all are a little bit scared of me. Everybody in my family is a little bit scared of me because they wonder what will be eaten and what will be consumed that they share with me, that they give me by walking through the room or telling me some story. So I feel that is part of the complexities of trying to be an artist or trying to express what art means to you, because it seems to me it's always at the something of other people. Again, young folks, we were talking about like influence. That's a question still that hovers around like what influence is, like what are you entitled to in terms of influence or in terms of like the people you love and trying to articulate what it means to love them. So is it anti-ars poetical? I don't know. Maybe the name will change too, but that's what I'm trying to work out. This question of like your life relies on sometimes on the sights and sounds of others. And certainly in my family, as I said, if you hear my mother, you can hear that. Anyway, he came to mind because of the Tampa thing, and I'm like, he's just so good with that stuff. It's like, oh, we're going to stay. I got a generator, and we're going like, if something happens to the roof, I can fix it. I'm like, okay. I'd be like, man, I got to get somebody in here to fix this thing, and I'm going to go get me a hotel, maybe in Orlando. So that I always have admired that inside of him saying it to me, know that I could be on stage talking about it. That's what I mean about like the give and take of my role with them.
So let's turn to that question of influence. It's 2024. We have a 2-year-old daughter at home, so I'm frequently having to do a sense check. It is 2024. Exactly 30 years ago, plus 1 semester, you were coming to Pittsburgh for the first time. You were talking last night, you were driving through Fort Pitt Tunnel, listening to one of the greatest pieces of music of all time, John Coltrane.
My favorite things.
And this is when you were starting up your MFA at Pittsburgh. And what's incredible reading through your work and listening to your interviews, you almost make it sound like you were placed in poetry by accident. You describe walking through the stacks, encountering Etheridge Knight, Sharon Olds. I know you read a lot of poetry coming up, but what were the early days of your Pittsburgh experience like for you in terms of developing your set of influences?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I say this when I'm traveling. I just became a poet here. I was not a poet where I grew up. I still joke, so, like we don't really read the New Yorker, so I could be in the New Yorker, but it's too many issues to read, But that was my family. It was not a family that had like, I think we had Ebony and Jet, and we had a set of encyclopedias, and there is my poetry. And I would ride to the library to read outside of genre, which still gets me back to, again, talking to young people, because when I applied from South Carolina to graduate school, it was like writing it in. It wasn't online at the time. That's how long ago it was. So I could write in what I was going to major in, and I put creative writing. So I did not say poetry. I did not say fiction or nonfiction, because as I understood it, writing with no creative writing classes and no sense of what it was in South Carolina, that it was just all creative writing. And I think that's right. Now, at, getting ready to be 53 or whatever I'm getting ready to be, I think that was right, that it should just be creative writing that we're teaching, even at the master's level, and letting people sort of figure out how they're going to negotiate inside of that when they need to be poets or not, So I would say coming to Pittsburgh, it was my first time both becoming a poet and people seeing me as a poet, and my first time just sort of trying to figure out what that was. So it is why I wasn't that. So like, did I read? I went to the library. I read a lot of stuff, but I did not know what poetry was, even though I was writing it. You know what I mean? Just showing it to an English teacher. But that would be it. I came here. I went to the Hillman. I wandered the libraries. I actually hung out with a bunch of spoken word poets. I was like an Aliquippa. All the things that goes with that. Everything that goes with hanging out with young people in their 20s. So certainly the full roundness of it, even beyond the question of like what I was getting in my MFA, was in Pittsburgh. And my most famous story, I think, of that experience was just like being in Greenfield. I think I told this on PBS. Maybe 1 o'clock in the morning, and some little white skinhead kid on a bike riding by me as we're going down the hill. And he turned around and he came back. You got to come up the hill. So I was sure we were going to fight. And then he stopped and he was like, "You the poet?" And then he rode on. And it was in Greenfield, if you know what that means. So I'm just sort of saying, that was a huge thing for me. And it was a thing that I talked about for many years about like not what a poet is, but what people who like poetry look like. How about that? Which would be a more interesting thing. And certainly when I talk about like the sports culture, I know the game's coming on soon, of Pittsburgh, as significant as the sports culture, I will also say to people, they got 2 museums for writers. They got a whole place for artists. Andy Warhol, that's unusual to go someplace that has a museum for like a contemporary artist, and August Wilson. So between those 2 things across in the vicinity of like the sports stadium says something about like the complex and nuanced cultural space and how that would be great for me as a person coming out of sports. I chose Pittsburgh because one of my track teammates was playing for the Steelers. He was like Willie Williams, he was a cornerback for the Steelers. So I was like, I'm going to go to Pittsburgh and also hang out with him. So even coming in, I sort of still thought that I would have a kind of athlete's life, but he was like, "You a grad student, man." He gave me a couple of tickets. He never let me meet anybody interesting, but I stayed, so I'm sort of saying to you, it was a transitional thing, but also a thing where I realized that I could kind of still like be in the sports or think about the way sports might relate to what I wanted to do as a writer. And it is because of the kind of overlap, I think, in this particular city. I think it's weird that it would be both. Not so much a food culture.
We're getting there.
But yes, certainly the sports culture and the literary history, including the International Poetry Forum, is just, I don't know where else I would have got to see that those things could kind of be of value to the people who live here, versus saying there's half the people who like one thing and half the people that like the other thing, versus saying like it's totally overlap. You see those same people at the Steelers games that you might see at a reading. Certainly that's true for Henry Reese. So yes, I think that is what I appreciate about this place.
I want to return to sports in a moment. All the questions I got from students involve sports, but when Sam founded the International Poetry Forum, he may have told you the story. I know I've told many here. He got a call from Harrisburg saying, well, if you're going to be working with chickens, you have to register with the state. And he said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you're launching an international poultry farm." And that's, the story's too good to be true. And I've always thought it was. This is completely honest. Last week, the exact same thing happened to me, where someone misheard as International Poultry Farm. And he was so right. He said, especially in '66, that would have been much less surprising.
Yeah.
Than as you said at the outset, to make this claim to be the International Poetry Forum in Pittsburgh. That's right. So when you were starting off as a poet here, did you have a sense of Pittsburgh as being that kind of almost countercultural force, or what did the poetry scene look like?
As I said, and again, I'm still just talking to like people trying to figure out how to do this thing. The most significant thing was just the library, Hillman, and of course Carnegie right across. So I always like, I don't know, you can't call yourself shy. I feel like that's counterintuitive to what shyness is. But I would say I was more likely to wander in the libraries than I would have been anywhere else. And then maybe the basketball court would be second, and I did do that too. But so I knew that there was a scene. I didn't necessarily feel like I was a part of it, but if you're in a space long enough, you become more comfortable with those things. And even now, I think part of the reason I came back was because I just sort of found all these people outside of the university. Certainly Toy was significant to me and other people, but I really had to go outside to find people that looked like maybe what I thought was good for me as a person coming from the South. And again, as that's changed, I think I've been in every part of Pittsburgh at this point. And I think that is a reflection of my sense of the city, but also, again, this question of like aesthetics. So I don't know if I'm answering your question. I think I just sort of fell into the water of the environment and just waited to see what was going to happen.
So I love that idea of wandering the library and encountering books for the first time. This is a question I got from a student. It's one of the favorite questions I've ever heard. If you knew that tomorrow you were going to get struck by lightning and forget all the poetry you'd ever read in your life, if you could pick 3 artists to encounter again, functionally for the first time, it's an impossible question, but you're starting from zero.
Maybe I'm still thinking about the actual times I encountered them. If that makes any sense. Like, not what I forgot, but the first thing is sort of like what I encountered, like stopping by the woods on a snowy evening, which you would get pretty early on. Robert Frost, Whose Woods Are These? I Think I Know. So I think that was something. Musically, Anodyne by Yusuf, that meant something too, because he's like, it swells like a temple. And I'm like, what? It swells like can I put that in a poem? That kind of thing. That meant something. And a lot of Toy's poems. I was just reading one of Toy's poems to Padma, this Invisible Dreams poem. And I was just saying, like, I didn't know really. I just felt like the way that she was, quote unquote, confessing in those poems as a student and friend of Sharon Olds and Lucille Clifton too. If you think of the way that Lucille is also confessing a certain kind of like truth in her poems, I just thought that would be like a really good skill for me and my body to have, which is a kind of vulnerability and a certain kind of, you can hear it in the poems, I guess, certain moments, like if I was a Black girl, like that's all from Toy. It's all from a sort of attitude of openness and vulnerability inside of the poem. So I got that. I would have not gotten that from anywhere else. I can very tangibly remember thinking that that's something that I wanted to be able to do as a poet, to be vulnerable like that. But the rest of it, yeah, I think it's so many different kinds of poems. It would just still be questions of like utility. So that's what I'm saying about this poem by Toy, Invisible Dreams. There were things in that I was like, oh wow, I think I want to be able to do something like that in a poem. I think that Neruda, I was totally in love with Neruda. And the sonnets too, there was some overlap between Shakespeare's sonnets and Neruda's 100 love sonnets that gets us back to like the American sonnets. You know what I was thinking about today, even as I was reading, or even the Ars Poetica with Bacon poem, this question of like just overlaps between like political gestures and aesthetic gestures, and wanting to say sometimes, oh, this poem, this gesture of them wandering with the war and whether they should go home or go back to the war, is like, is that a refugee? Is that contemporary, what we're talking about? And so how often you want to frame your poems in terms of things that you think are relevant? Like, how would I talk about that poem as it is today and what's going on in the world, or do I just let you guys figure it out, that it might be speaking to things beyond, what's in the book? But those are good questions to have, I think, and those are questions that I'm most comfortable with people that I am comfortable with. Otherwise, I'm usually maybe trying to decide before I show up what it's going to be. Am I answering your question?
Absolutely.
It's my siesta time. I think I'm like, am I staying focused? Might be nap time.
I hear you. It's often that time for me. So one more question on that first year, 1994, 95. So you completed your first year of the MFA. In June 1995, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette published what I think is one of the most beautiful and effective poems in the language. Do you remember which poem this is?
My poem? One of my poems?
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't think any of my poems are the most beautiful poem effective in the language. So I don't know what that would be.
This was Candied Yams.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that never showed up in a book, I still haven't published it. I need to look at that.
It has one of my favorite endings of any poem, to make magic magic.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's food too, which is also weird that I would write about food in any kind of, like, even bacon don't really show up in Ars Poetica with bacon.
Sure.
But these poems were all like recipe poems. That's right. I don't even think I have a copy of those things. I gotta look them up somehow.
Mm-hmm. So that was a part of a series that Sam Hayes started, right. Post-Gazette publishing poets, which is a great tradition. But it's incredible to think that that's the first year after MFA that poem comes out. It's just wonderful. But I want to turn to the athletics question. One of my favorite quotations of yours that a student brought up is, if you can break dance, great. If you can break dance in a straitjacket, even better.
Yeah, against yourself, though. That's the other thing, which is also what I'm negotiating in that poem. Should I name them as gender? I am thinking about my brother, so eventually I say it. Should they be twins? Maybe it should just be like siblings. It could be lovers too, like the dynamic of who's the artist and who's the doer. See, I told you, it's nap time. Because what was your question again?
Well, I think you're one of the most articulate poets on the question of what constraints can do.
Sure, right. So that's why I thought about the twin thing. So the full quote is like, if you are fighting against yourself. If you have some competition where it's a person knows everything that you know, is it going to be a stalemate? But no, if one person's wearing a straitjacket, that person will win. Because everything you're doing has that extra kind of formal constraint, even if you're matched. And that would be form. That would be like a long sentence. Like clearly I can meditate in other ways on what that line means. I don't know why God is blessing me for, I could do a bunch of stuff. But rather than focus on content, I'm saying I'm just going to think about a sentence and see where it shows up and sort of be surprised in that way. So I'm still kind of following a formal sense more than a subject sense as I go in that kind of direction. I still feel like I'm not answering your question.
No, absolutely. My mother's here. We play basketball. I have a foot on her, but she demolishes me. And my sister too, they'll both play with their non-dominant hands. And this is a kind of constraint that introduces new ways. They end up playing the game in a new way.
Yeah, well, that's what constraints do. This is why I said the thing about the speed limit. We were talking and I was like, but if you do 30 miles over the speed limit, that's anarchy. That's pointless. But if you can get away with doing like 10, 9, sometimes 15, but probably around 10, that is what you're trying to do. You're trying to get right where you've been in the rule without breaking the rule, I think, if it's a reasonable rule. So for me, that's the thing about the straitjacket. Like the straitjacket in a battle against yourself is, even if you're not winning necessarily, just more interesting to see how you're negotiating the same moves inside of that. And so I like to have something like that when people are asking me about form, but I'm still just not always thinking about subject. I'm just mostly thinking about how I can get to something I didn't anticipate. If that makes any sense. I'm just trying to, the way that you're trying to get out of the straitjacket is the surprise in that kind of competition.
So for context, if there are any poets, budding poets here, Terrance does a lot of great work with the sonnet form, for example, when you have these constraints that are introduced and you end up struggling and just these really incredible moments are introduced. One of the most common questions I get asked from folks in town who are new poets is, I'm interested in setting myself a challenge. You mentioned one challenge, the students downstairs. Are there any forms that you recommend people experiment with if they're looking to start out as a poet?
Don't rhyme in the sonnet. That's the first thing, because it's distraction, unless you're going to do some internal rhyme. But what I love about the sonnet, and you would take this principle even outside of 14 lines, is the volta in the sonnet, which means at some point you're going to have to change your mind. So what I say, and I didn't really read any sonnets today, is like Shakespeare's sonnet is the English sonnet. It's 12 lines thinking one thing, and then the last 2 lines is the volta. So here's your 14. And then in the Italian sonnet, the Petrarchan sonnet, it's 8 lines, 2 quatrains thinking a thing, and then the volta, and then it's 6 lines out. So to me, the 12 to 2 is totally British. Only colonial people who are colonizers would think. And 14 lines, I'm right for 12. And then for 2, that's humanity. Enlightenment, though, the Enlightenment is like, it's never going to be 7/7. You ain't never found no sonnet that was like rhyme this 7 and then rhyme that 7. That's too perfect. But the Enlightenment would be like, I'm right for 8 and you might be right for 6. So the idea of the volta coming is what I'm most interested in sonnet. So when I was doing those American sonnets for my past and future assassin, because I was writing political poems about a person that I knew going in was a motherfucker, Donald Trump, I was like, well, how can I not come out always saying he's a motherfucker? And I was like, the sonnet, because it's a love poem and because that volta means in some way I have to change my mind at some process in it. But the American sonnet now, if the English sonnet is 12 and then you change your mind I think the American sonnet has several voltas. It can't be 1, it can't be 2. It's because we're just revolving. You get a black president and then you get this kind of president, that kind of sense of history, that sense of progress, and the sense of changing one's mind. In the American sonnet, for me, is a volta that's just totally unstable. So people who say like, oh, it doesn't rhyme, it's not scan, I'm like, it's an American sonnet. The modifier is American. I did something in Germany in July, and I said to them as a kind of prompt, maybe this is the prompt coming, like, what would be your modifier though? Like if you say, what is a German sonnet? They said something crazy about what I did. It was something that would make sense about Nazis or something. But they made a statement, oh, the German sonnet would be, it was a joke, but a German sonnet would be blah, blah, blah. And I think that is the question, like, what is your volta? What is your form? So a rule would be like, what would be your, I could be like, it's a Terrance sonnet, and then think about what my sense of change it would be, and then put that inside of those 14 lines. Maybe you think nothing changes. So what does it mean to write a poem that doesn't change? Is that a list poem? So it's just these questions that come from the notion of a volta. So I don't think it has to be a sonnet, but the sonnet is where I would get something like that from. Just a desire to change your mind, however you're going into the poem, a desire to have some sort of thing you were not expecting to happen inside of the process is kind of what I show up for, you know?
Just a few more questions. I have to ask this one because it was the most asked by the students. You have great fashion, and you've spoken a lot about you work as a painter, as a musician. I haven't heard you say much about fashion. Is that something that you think about very often, or is that?
Okay, so look, this is funny because I was just somewhere. I was talking to Sharon Olds, and she's in a place where when she goes into this public space, everybody's all decked out and dressed. And she's like, man, my hair is, I got a sweatshirt on sometimes. I was like, but the great thing about being a poet is nobody knows what a real poet's fashion is. Some people say black maybe. So, I like to put a little black on. But otherwise, I love that no one really knows what a poet's fashion would be, right? I mean, most people think poets don't have fashion, I thought. So I feel like in my relationship to poetry, it would be the same. I just try not to be too settled in one kind of thing. So I have certain kind of consistencies that I won't bring up. But otherwise, when you go into the store, as when you go into the bookstore, you're just looking for something that's interesting. I think if you go into the store knowing you want a white T-shirt, that's a less interesting person to me. So I would never be that. Am I making sense? I'm talking fashion in terms of poetry here. I'm saying like it's the same thing. Like, poetry is at the center of everything I do. So almost everything is going to be somehow metaphorically related to that. So I would say my sense of fashion is much like my sense of like how a poet dresses, which no one knows. So that means sometimes I can be fashionable, sometimes I'm not. And if I'm not, I'll just like, I'm a poet. But beyond that, no, I don't think too much about it. I don't think. Well, I saw Sheila. We were in Virginia a little while ago at this great festival. So you can see what I remember from what people say to me, Sheila. And I think we were on the elevator. And what'd you say? You were like, oh, I think I have white pants on or something. And you were like, oh, you're looking good. And so what I was like, what have I been looking like before? I was like, how did I dress in Pittsburgh? So, I do think the line I'm giving you is that the great advantage of the poet is that nobody knows what the fuck we are. So we can do whatever we want to do, dress how we want. And that's what I said to Sharon when she was like, I'm like, girl, you look like a poet going in there to me. I mean, how do they want you to dress? So that would be the answer, at least around fashion, I guess.
That's great. There's two more questions. Sam, my predecessor, is really insisting that poetry takes part in this space of performance. And I've been reading through the Post-Gazette archives, and it's funny, there's a real kind of snobbery, some reviews coming in. He brought in Judy Collins was the first musician. The first actor was Brock Peters. And I think that snobbery has gone away. It's a good thing. When I talk to people in town, who do you want to see? Very happy to have actors and musicians come in to read poetry. So that's wonderful. But I've been thinking a lot about this question. You have a great poem, sort of in the tradition of Bob Ross, great voice. If you could have a documentary made of your work and you could revive anyone from history, any voice to perform your poems, do you have an all-time favorite voice for reading poetry?
See, now, what is it? Roscoe? Who knows this guy's name with the bald head, brown dude? Roscoe P. Jones? Roscoe Lee. Who said that? That's right. Amazing voice. Right? Like, and they're like Shakespearean, rich, sonora. Actually, sometimes I listen to him because like, I think I want to read my poems like this. He does this great reading of like Donald Barthelme's short story. Otherwise, I don't even think about that kind of stuff. I just love that dude's voice. But my attitude about that kind of stuff is what I said about the selected poems. The last poem and the next poem is what I really try to think about most days. I don't want to think about legacy. I don't want to think about collecteds and selecteds. I just want to be like, can I do better than I have done? And I just have to think that every day, even if I might be wrong. Like, I still think maybe the best poems could be ahead of me. So that's it. Otherwise, I don't think about those kinds of questions. I barely think about book sales, honestly. I'm just like, poems. Books are such a distraction, from trying to write, trying to just make things happen when you're out trying to move books. But you got to do it. I understand. So no, I don't think too much about that. But you know what I thought you were going to say, and this is just again talking about Sam, was the memorized thing, that Sam would have all his poems memorized. And I did, when I thought I had the ending right on that thing, I had it all memorized and I kind of got out under the hood again. But there is something about the memorized poem. But I always thought there was a way that people would say it. Well, Sam memorizes all his poems. So it would be that kind of thing. And I was like, yeah, he got all of them memorized. So there was a way I almost felt like people didn't want to talk about the poems. They just wanted to talk about what you're setting up, like this performance of it. And I think there's some middle ground. I feel like everybody should have one or two of their own poems memorized, but that's kind of a new thought, So when I get a couple memorized, I'll be like, everybody should have one or two of your own poems memorized.
Right.
No, but that's what I admired about him. I think it was rare, and I do think there was something old school about it that was implicitly a judgment. I will finally say, did I say this? I think I said this downstairs. I was talking to a poet, a grad poet, and said, well, there will be poems in your book that should only be read, that maybe you will never read them on the stage. And that too is a liberty when you're writing them. They're like, oh, I don't think I'll ever say this in front of anybody, but I still want to write it. And then there will be poems that you'll definitely want to read out in front of people. And that also is information. So I do. I mean, I think about what it would be like to be up here reading things to y'all sometimes. But that memorized thing, I almost feel like I'm a little too scatterbrained to like rely on that exclusively, which is what he could do. He probably could still do it at 96. He probably still got half his poems memorized.
He does. Yeah, Sam,
Yeah.
that's actually the last question. It involves that of memory. He was over, Sam is in wonderful health, was over recently, and my mother made a comment about Ireland, and he launched into a poem from his third book. It's incredible. I mean, he's really unique talent, but really that's been part of his process. Yeah. The question I want to ask you is about going back to the final poem you read, finishing poems. One of the things I respect most about you is you really shirk any firm idea of finishing. You talk about it in terms of a praxis, of an exercise. And for Sam, the question of when the poem was finished was, he says, when it lives in your memory or it lives in your voice. So he would recite to his wife a lot. And if he tripped up on a line, he would say, okay, this line's not finished. And when he felt like it lived in the mouth and lived in the heart, then it was done. But this is, it's an impossible question, but one that poets are struggling with constantly. So I'll ask you specifically about this poem. Do you have some tactics in trying to finish it? Is an end in sight, or is the Anti-Ars Poetica a poem that will never end?
No, this is a good question because of when I started out saying, even though I'm not even sure if I should be explicit about it being the twins being male. To me, that's a kind of limitation in the poem. I would like you to not think about them as being male, but the basement of that is I'm really just talking about my brother. And there's sort of the issue, like working out how much I would lean on whose sacrifice or whose fear. So as I said, like sometimes, I guess today I'm ending, I think it still was too much, on the idea that the villagers are afraid of the griot. Sometimes I say the poet storyteller figure, they won't put him in the village. But that still is not getting to what I would want to get at. I would feel like if my brother was in the audience, I would need some sort of ending that would let him know what I'm really talking about. And that's not quite there yet. So, and again, it wouldn't be explicit, but that's, again, we're just talking about like the performance of poems. And I could feel it. I did have it memorized all last year and did a couple of readings of it, but I just knew whenever I was finishing it, it just wasn't landing like I would want it to. But the thing about time, which I also talked about just morning, the great thing is like nobody's waiting on it. Ain't no magazine be like, man, I can't wait for that, or nobody's going to test me on it. There's not an end of the semester. So I feel like I can kind of play with it if I'm comfortable with like sort of exposing myself to y'all in that regard, and which I am. I'm fine with like showing you stuff that's in process. But other than that, I'll know when I know. I don't feel like I want to rush it. And at this point, that thing must be a year old because I thought I had it done and then I realized it wasn't. And again, maybe even, as I said, the hurricanes and a thought that I've had before, how about that, how poems work? Like I came back to some other conclusion about the kind of man and sacrificer my brother is, and that sent me back to the poem again to be like, So we'll see.
Well, Terrance, we can't begin to thank you. It's been such a pleasure to have you here as part of the relaunch of the International Poetry Forum. Please join me in
thank you all.
A round of applause.
Welcome back.
So Terrance will have a flight to catch here, but we have some time to sign some books up on stage. Books are on sale from City of Asylum Bookstore. Thank you once again for a wonderful host, City of Asylum, for hosting us here today. And thank you very much for all of you for being here. And have a nice day. Thank you one last time to Terrance.
Look at that. You can get on for that football game. Am I sitting up here signing?